Hi there, I'm Andrea Koppel, and it's time for coffee, the podcast where you get to hear firsthand what the jobs and careers that interest you the most are really like. Hey there, Java junkies. Welcome to another K-Cup mini episode of Time for Coffee. By the way, K-Cups come in 3 sizes, single, double, and triple shots, or roughly 1 minute, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes in length. So if you don't have time to throw back an entire caffeinated career conversation, these K-Cup mini episodes of T4C can give you a quick caffeinated fix, whether you're on the go or you only have a few minutes to binge. So grab your mug and take a chug, because it's time for a caffeinated career double shot K-Cup with my guest, Fred Serricchio. What about internships? Did you have any when you were an undergrad?
I did not. I tried to get those too, but they didn't come to me. I had a good GPA, but there's 1,000 people applying for one job, so the odds aren't really there. So every summer I kept applying for internships at a bunch of different places, and none of those came through.
So what was your first job out of college, and how did you get it?
After 4 years of trying, I interviewed with JPL actually, and I didn't hear anything. And this was getting towards the end of March and April and May. And I'm like thinking to myself, well, I guess I'm going to have to just work on campus again this summer. My job there was actually painting the dorms because it paid more than doing the research. So I'm like, okay, I'll do this again. Until I realized, well, let me at least call JPL to find out where I stand, if they've made all their decisions and if they've hired everyone they were going to for that summer. We went on the phone, said that I interviewed well and that they had pretty much hired everyone. So I'm like, well, when you say interviewed well, what does that mean? And she's like, we got a 1+ rating. And I asked, is that good? Is that out of 5 or what's the scale? She said 1+ is the best rating that you can get. So I asked her, well, if you're going to hire somebody, why wouldn't you hire me? Like someone who scored high. And she's like, well, let me call you back in a little while. So she hung up the phone. She called someone at JPL. And that same day, she called me back saying, give this person a call who's actually in the same section that I'm in right now. Talk to them and see if you'd like to do a summer job. So I called him and he was talking about testing some actuators that would end up on the Cassini spacecraft. And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to do that. And so he said, okay. That was a Thursday. And I ended up flying out that weekend and starting at JPL on that Tuesday because it was Memorial Day weekend. So it wasn't typical for me to be that pushy. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be at this job today because I wouldn't have gotten that internship that summer. I wouldn't have met the people I've met. I wouldn't have been able to have a 10-week job interview, which is what an internship really is. And I wouldn't have been invited back that next summer and turned into full-time. So if I hadn't made that phone call when it was already a little too late for the summer and those jobs had already been given away, and it wasn't for that woman to make that connection with the group supervisor at the time, then I wouldn't have this job. So I'm very thankful for my younger self to have done that.
Oh my God, what an incredible story. So you picked up the phone, and who did you call again?
This was the woman in HR who had been involved in the campus recruiting, and I had interviewed with someone on campus, and they get hundreds of interviews, 100 of applications. So it really was one of 100 who all of them could have been future JPL employees. I wasn't picked that summer, but I asked, is it too late? And basically she went out of her way to say, well, it's not too late. Let me see if there's someone who can make a job for the summer, because there's plenty of work. And sometimes those internship opportunities come up late. It's like we don't know that we'll need somebody until May, when most of the students by then have already gone off to their summer internships or have accepted at different places. So she went out of her way to make that connection for me and do that networking, and thankful that she did.
So what was it, do you think, Fred, that had you atypically decide to pick up the phone and then to push back a little bit when she said you got a really high score?
Because for the 4 years prior, I hadn't gotten an internship. I was working hard. I wanted to get that next step. I guess this was the end of an entire undergraduate career where I had done pretty well. I had a good GPA. I learned the things in classes. I wanted a chance to get in the real world, start to apply this sort of thing. And if I hadn't asked then it was just basically saying, okay, I'll try again next year. And I got tired of waiting to try again next year.
So what do you think the takeaway is that you could share with our young listeners?
Probably one, to not lose hope and get discouraged. That's definitely important because especially with internships, there's a lot of people applying. And even if you're a freshman, sophomore, or junior, there's people who have already gotten their bachelor's and are a couple of years into their master's or their PhD, who you're also competing with. Now I see it from that side where it didn't mean what I thought it meant at the time, because the pool of people is just so large. And it's also okay that if I had taken an internship at a place where I wouldn't have seen myself for 20 or 30 years just to get experience, that would have been another thing I could have tried in earlier years. But for me, it was like, I want a space exploration job, so that's what I was focusing on. But there's plenty of experience I could have gotten in other industries that I could have brought to wherever I ended up.
For sure. And what I think is so interesting about that example, Fred, is I think sometimes that's what employers are looking for. They're looking for someone who has a fire in their belly and who isn't going to take no for an answer. Because if you think about, in the case of JPL and NASA, the work that you're doing, I mean, you're banging your head against the wall a lot of the time looking for solutions to problems that may seem intractable.
Yeah, there definitely needs to be an stick-to-itiveness and that kind of dedication and that kind of tenacity.
Thanks for tuning in to this K-Cup mini episode of Time for Coffee. If you want to listen to our entire caffeinated career conversation, please check out the show notes for this episode. Thanks so much for listening to Time for Coffee, where the professionals in the jobs that most interest you always have time to grab coffee, 24/7, no matter where you live. I have one quick favor to ask you. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to Time for Coffee. Thanks so much.